Welcome to our Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity discussion to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We didn't want this year to end without having this important discussion. Even though we're late to the table, we've been busy this year, but here we are in December, and we're closing out the year and want to make sure that we are all able to get together and chime in on this very important topic. For those of you who are watching that are not familiar with our commission, we are a nonpartisan agency with a data-driven, cross-cultural approach to policy innovation. We work to eliminate disparities by identifying opportunities, building connections, and promoting change with a focus on informing and engaging all policymakers about the needs for women, children, and their families, seniors, and the African American, Asian, Pacific American, and Islander populations, Latino and Puerto Rican populations as well, in the state of Connecticut. We are always looking to ensure access and opportunity for all. So this act, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson on July 2nd, 1964. And it prohibited the discrimination in public spaces, provided for the integration of schools and other public facilities, and made employment discrimination illegal. It was the most sweeping civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. In a nationally televised address on June 6, 1963, President John F. Kennedy urged the nation to take action toward guaranteeing equal treatment of every American, regardless of race. Soon after, Kennedy proposed that Congress consider civil rights legislation that would address voting rights, public accommodations, school desegregation, discrimination, and federally assisted programs, and much more. And despite Kennedy's assassination in November of 1963, his proposal culminated in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed it into law just a few hours after it was passed by Congress on July 2nd, 1964. The act itself outlawed segregation in businesses such as theaters, restaurants, and hotels. It banned discrimination practices in employment, and it also ended segregation in public spaces such as swimming pools, libraries, and public schools. The passage of the act was not easy. However, opposition in the House of Representatives bottled up the bill in the House Rules Committee. And for those of you who work in legislatures, you know how that goes. In the Senate, Southern Democratic opponents attempted to talk the bill to death in a filibuster in early 1964, and House supporters overcame the Rules Committee obstacle by threatening to send the bill to the floor without committee approval. The Senate filibuster was overcome through the floor leadership of Senator Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota, the considerable support of President Lyndon B. Johnson, and the efforts of Senate Minority Leader Everett Dirksen of Illinois, who convinced enough Republicans to support the bill over Democratic opposition. When the compromise bill was finally put to a vote in the Senate, it was passed 73-27. It was noted in the congressional record that the applause broke out in the Senate galleries. Title VII of the Act created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, to implement the law. The EEOC enforces laws that prohibit discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or age in hiring, promoting, firing, setting wages, testing, training, apprenticeship, and all other terms and conditions of employment. So that's a little bit on the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to get our discussion started. We have questions for our team here at the commission, and I want to do a little bit of an introduction before we get started. We have Yukio Ida, who's our Associate Director of Parent Leadership and Family Engagement. We have Werner Oyenadel, who's the Policy Director for Latino and Puerto Rican Affairs. We have Thomas Nuccio, who's our Child Policy Analyst. We have Christian Duborg, who is our Food and Nutrition Policy Analyst. We have Michael Werner, who's our analyst who leads us in our aging policy. We also have Rosemary Lopez, who's our Women's Policy Analyst, and Megan Baker, who also covers Asian American Pacific Islander issues. and Denise Werner, who covers African American policy issues. So that's our team here. We have questions for everyone, and I'm excited to get the conversation started. So first question goes to Yukio. How did the Civil Rights Act influence U.S. immigration policy?
Great, thank you. So as an immigrant myself, even though this law came into place before I was even born, it has greatly influenced my life and my family's ability to be in the United States. Because the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination based on national origin, the previous immigration law, which really banned immigration from different countries that were not necessarily represented in the United States, uh, that law, right, was reimagined in 1965. So previously, the law only really allowed for a lot of the European country immigrants to come into the United States because it was based on quotas of the population of those national origins in the United States. So the population of the United States was largely represented by Western European immigrants, which then really minimized immigration from countries like Japan, Korea, China, in those parts of the world. So when the Immigration Act was changed in 1965, the quota system did not exist anymore, which really allowed for a larger portion of those unrepresented ethnicities to be able to come into the United States. So without this really important Civil Rights Act of 1965, I probably would not be here being a part of this wonderful community, being able to civically engage in different aspects of the United States. And so I truly am appreciative of the reimagining of how we welcome folks, how we categorize, the different areas that we are no longer discriminating against. Because again, my family would not be here. So that's how the immigration was impacted by the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Thank you, Yukio. And we know since 1964, immigration policy has definitely seen different phases and has experienced waves. And we expect that that will not continue to change. Hopefully, we will be moving toward more equitable policies for all immigrants who want to be here in the United States. Thanks so much, Yukio, for that. My next question goes to Werner. And Werner, how has the Civil Rights Act of 1964 influenced Latino communities in Connecticut, particularly in areas such as housing, employment, and education?
Thank you, Melvet, for that question. And what a wonderful opportunity to celebrate this historical moment in the United States history. The Civil Rights Acts of 1964 laid the foundation for addressing systemic discrimination in our country. And it impacted all those areas that you mentioned in the areas of housing, employment, and education. But that was sort of, in my opinion, the beginning of all the work that needed to be done at the different states to make sure that the enforcement part of this law would actually take to place. And just to give you an example in the area of education, it wasn't until the 1990s that Connecticut began to take cases to desegregate the state to have more educational opportunities for African American and mostly Latino students with the Supreme Court case of Chef Bermudez versus O'Neill here in the state. A lot of people remember that case as just Chef v. O'Neill, but the silent face of that was the Latino community that was also part of that significant case. So just imagine that it took so many years to actually have this conversation here in Connecticut, and many would argue that that was a very slow process by which some of the solutions have been implemented in the state. So I think that also speaks to the work that we do here in the legislature. Connecticut, I think it's fascinating because we have the first in the nation civil rights agency, the Connecticut Human Rights and Opportunities Commission, that was implemented back in the 1940s, believe it or not, to actually be the enforcer of the civil rights in the state of Connecticut. But going back to the actual Civil Rights Act of 1964. uh, Latinos have been facing a number of discrimination issues. One which was very significant in Connecticut when we began to get calls. And when I say we, when the commissions were separated, the Latino and Puerto Rican Affairs Commissions began to receive phone calls at the office of people that were alleging that were being discriminated and their civil rights abused by police officers. And as a result of the serious allegations that we received, even these legislative agencies that are now part of the umbrella of the CWCSEO, we were able to focus on reaching out to the legislature and co-writing a letter to the Justice Department for the Justice Department to investigate these allegations. Those investigations through the Justice Department, I don't believe that could have been possible if the Act of 1964 was passed. And so we are happy that, number one, that the Justice Department responded to those allegations and they asked the Commission to provide a location for the investigations to happen. We were told not to say anything to anyone about those serious investigations that were taking place here. So the history of that is pretty significant. At the end of the day, the Civil Rights Act allowed us for the Justice Department to investigate. The investigations were forwarded to the criminal courts, and the police officers were actually found guilty of abusing the civil rights of Latino people in the East Haven community. So I'm very touched by this celebration. I am so excited that we are celebrating. We wouldn't be here at the work that we do at the Capitol and at the People's House if it wasn't for this landmark law that was passed here in the United States of America.
Thanks so much, Werner. And, you know, when we look at the piece on housing and how the Civil Rights Act was supposed to open up housing opportunities for people of color and those who had historically been disenfranchised, we still saw redlining, and we still today continue to see things like redlining. So I would advise people, like, if you're really interested in learning more about housing policy and how we have progressed in desegregation, as well as opening opportunities up to people to live in different communities and to get mortgages in different areas, and to really look at housing discrimination through different lenses, I would say you have to read the book, The Color of Law, and you also have to read Poverty by America. So those are my tips for our viewers today. Thank you, Werner, so much for those insights. We're going to go next to, who are we going to next?
I think it's me, actually.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's TJ. So TJ, how does the Civil Rights Act of 1964 influence public schools and institutions of higher education, and who enforces compliance with the law? I know Werner started giving us a little bit of that, but take us a little deeper.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. As we have heard today, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the landmark legislation prohibiting discrimination in several areas, some of which include housing, employment, and education. The sections of the law relating to education fall under Title VI, which authorizes the U.S. Attorney General to address equal protection violations based on race, color, national origin, sex, and religion in public schools and in institutions of higher education. And to answer the second part of the question about enforcement, it is really the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights that enforces the law. Specifically, the Office for Civil Rights ensures that recipients of financial assistance from the Department of Education are compliant with the law. It is also important to note that Title VI covers pre-K through grade 12 in public schools, as well as charter schools, colleges, and universities, and other institutions that receive financial assistance from the Department of Education. Thank you.
We'll have to go into the other titles before we leave this space together. There are 11 titles, I believe. And thank you, TJ, for those insights. I think it's important that people understand like the enforcement pieces and compliance, because what good is law if we don't have enforcement and the acting out of it? And that's why it's important that we look through the lens of, we sit in the legislature, but also the judicial and the executive branches are equally important as we look at, legislation being carried out and honored. Thank you so much for that, Christian. We're going to go to Michael next. Well, actually going to go to Christian. Thanks, TJ. So how does the Civil Rights Act continue to be relevant today, Christian, especially as it relates to food and nutrition insecurity? And since we're already having this conversation around education, I would also like you to put on your hat as a former teacher and let us know what else you might add in that education space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because it perfectly piggybacks off of what you and TJ were just talking about, I'll start with the teacher hats. And I think the answer to both the teacher hat and the food and nutrition hat is that the Civil Rights Act is still relevant today because of the after effects of all the policies of discrimination that predated it. And since we were just talking about enforcement in education, the Department of Justice is still enforcing, using the Civil Rights Act to enforce desegregation today. The Justice Department has entered into consent decrees with local school districts to ensure desegregation as recently as 2023, so last year. So this tool is still actively being used to make sure that there can be equity in education and that students can go to schools with their neighbors, with other people in their communities. And turning to my sort of specific personal story. So when I was an educator, I was living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And specifically, I lived in a neighborhood called St. George, which was a predominantly white, predominantly affluent area that shortly before I moved there, actually tried to leave the city of Baton Rouge and create itself as a brand new town. And the reason they did that was because in doing so, they could leave the public school district for East Baton Rouge Parish and create their own school district where their property taxes could be pooled into a more affluent district that would be predominantly white and would, at least in theory, they thought would perform better. And that didn't succeed, but they were the third town to attempt that. There were two other communities in Baton Rouge that had already left the city and created their own school districts, which were some of the best resourced and highest performing in the state. And they were also predominantly white. Whereas the public school district in East Baton Rouge Parish had less resources and was becoming less diverse with time. So not only are you dealing with the after effects of decades or even centuries of discriminatory policies, but you're also seeing the Civil Rights Act be an important tool to prevent backsliding and the elimination of progress that's been made in the last 60 years. And then turning to my food hat, the after effects of those older policies are still just as pronounced. So Feeding America says that about 12.9% of Connecticut's population is experiencing food insecurity. For residents who identify as Black or African American, that's 25%. And for residents who identify as Hispanic or Latino, that's 27%, more than double the statewide average. And one of the major reasons for that is because of the prevalence of so-called food deserts, or what we now call low-income, low-access areas. So census tracts are neighborhoods where there are no grocery stores. And in those neighborhoods in Connecticut, there's about 48% of Black residents in Connecticut live in one of those food desert areas. 42% of Connecticut's Hispanic or Latino residents, but just 14.9% of Connecticut's white residents. So just in the simple act of physically being able to go to the grocery store and get food and bring it home, we're still seeing significant disparities. And I think underlying that and the school issues and a lot of these other issues is the issue of housing that we were talking about earlier. So having these after effects of redlining and housing discrimination is affecting where people live today and also which communities have resources built up and which ones don't.
Thank you. That was so good. I'm loving this conversation. Before we go to Michael, I have questions for others on the team. I really want to take us through really quickly, just for our audience to understand the different titles. We're not going to go into explanations, but for people to hear the different titles within the Civil Rights Act. So Title I is about voting rights. Next year, we want you to stay tuned because we will be having a conversation about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Title II talks about public accommodations. Title III gets into desegregation of public facilities. Title IV is desegregation of public education. Title V is the Civil Rights Commission. Title VI, as mentioned previously, non-discrimination in federally assisted programs. Title VII is the equal employment opportunity where we see the EEOC come out of. And then Title VIII is registration and voting statistics, right? So that was directed, it directed the Census Bureau to collect registration and voting statistics based on race, color, and national origin, but it also provided the individuals could not be compelled to disclose such information, right? So I just wanted to share that because Voting Rights Act of 1965 did so much more in the voting space. Title IX, intervention in court cases. Title X, community relations service. And Title XI was court proceedings and legality. So that gives you an overview of the different titles within the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So we're going to go to Michael. Michael, why are the protections established by the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and other acts of that era still important to older adults? Give us something on that.
Thank you very much. And it's so great to be here. And it really ties into my work at the commission, my postgraduate days, really trying to understand, particularly during the pandemic, when we take first a look at the more immediate context of protecting seniors and all of that they went through during that time, and taking a look back at aging policy to help benefit and protect them. In Title VI, among the different protections has to do with national origin and making sure that we don't discriminate against folks based on language or accessibility. And that's so important when it comes to receiving services. You mentioned briefly before about enforcement, and we had the 1957 Act, which also established the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and these all still have legacy impacting older adults. One of the other areas that is so important when it comes to age discrimination, when we talk about our seniors, has to do in employment spaces too. And so when we think about that, even in a modern context, it's still relevant because we have seniors who are now, according to recent AARP data, nearly 35% of our workforce is over 50. Connecticut is the sixth oldest state in the nation. And when we talk about the two fastest growing cohorts of folks who are in the labor pool, that's folks who are 65 to 74 and folks that are 75 and plus. And one of the issues that goes along with age discrimination is there are folks who, nearly half of recently surveyed people, according to AARP, fear that their older age will hurt them in trying to find new work if they're continuing to look for that, especially in difficult economic circumstances. So during my initial time here at the commission as a postgraduate fellow back in the 2021 session, we were coming off of the pandemic. You know, one of the privileges I have, in addition to serving here, is as a member of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, which I've been a member of, an appointee, a federal appointee since 2016, is being able to help protect these different protected classes, which includes older adults. And during the pandemic, we had folks who were locked up in nursing homes. They had family members who weren't able to see them. They were behind glass. The folks who were in these nursing homes, they weren't able to understand, why can't we interface? And there's really that important component of having that family participation in helping older adults, especially those who are vulnerable and in these long-term care facilities. So our commission, the Federal Civil Rights Commission, took a look at what Connecticut was doing in its practices, conducted a federal briefing and investigation, and really ended up helping to promote this concept in its findings of having an essential support person designation, and to help Connecticut understand the importance of having a statewide visitation policy. The result of that work was to help encourage the Connecticut General Assembly to pass Public Act 2171, which was an act concerning essential support persons and a statewide visitation for residents of long-term care facilities. During that same legislative session, there was also concerns about age discrimination in work. And just to understand, federally speaking, age discrimination starts at 40 years old. It sounds young now, but back in the 60s, that was when folks were concerned about it. In Connecticut now, it starts at 65, but the legislature, the General Assembly, also passed Public Act 2169, an act concerning age discrimination in employment applications. And it was through that act that now in Connecticut, and it was through this commission, the Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity and Opportunity, and through our promotion of it, helped to pass it. So now that during employment applications, there's not asking for birth dates, not asking for graduation dates, unless it's really essential to a function of the role. And we are currently now living in a state that has reduced age discrimination in employment hiring practices due to the legacy of the Civil Rights Act in the era.
Thank you, Michael, for that robust accounting of some of the things that are intersecting these issues around age and age discrimination. And for many people understand that the work of the commission is very intersectional. And while we address things that affect different people groups and different demographics, certainly our next three questions will be answered by the women here at the table, the rest of the women at the commission. And so I'm going to go to Rosemary Lopez. Rosemary, you are our women's policy analyst, and you've been here at the legislature for many, many years. We won't tell folks, but you've known things and seen things, and certainly you were with the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women, and you continue to carry that torch forward in the women's policy space. But tell us why the term sex was added to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and what impact does it have on the inclusion, on addressing gender discrimination in employment and beyond. So Michael kind of started talking a little bit about some of that discrimination, but tell us more about the gender discrimination and why the term sex was added to the Civil Rights Act.
Yes. Thank you, Melva, for allowing me to be part of this great conversation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 stands as a landmark in American history, prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Specifically, Title VII of the Act addresses the employment discrimination piece. However, not sure if you know that sex, meaning gender, was not included in the initial draft of the bill. The inclusion of gender in Title VII is a story of speculation and perseverance. For the first time, women were provided a legal foundation to combat employment discrimination, making this amendment groundbreaking. It's interesting that the addition of gender was a late amendment to the bill. Believe it or not, despite its passage, some leaders considered the provision insignificant, even a joke. Sad, but it's true. That's when a newly formed group of National Organization for Women, known as NOW, refused to let this provision be ignored. Through organized protest, letter writing, campaigns, and persistent advocacy, they reminded leadership of Title VII's inclusion of women and expressed outrage at the initial neglect of this part of the law. Not sure if you know, but one of those visible battles involved the airline companies back then. These companies had long imposed discriminatory rules on their female employees, including restrictions based on age, weight, and marital status. But determined flight attendants, yay to them, challenged these practices, setting a precedent for workplace equality in the airline industry and nationwide. Their efforts slowly but surely dismantled discriminatory practices and opened doors for women throughout the workforce. I will say, though, there has been progress over the past 60 years, such as women's participation in the workforce has grown significantly, contributing to economic and social advancement. Women have also made strides in higher education, particularly in traditional male-dominant fields such as STEM and law. But unfortunately, there are still ongoing challenges. Wage gaps persist, with women earning less on average than men, and the disparities are even more pronounced for women of color. Also, women remain underrepresented in executive and leadership roles across many industries. So I'll just leave you with some recommended strategies moving forward for those watching. Staying informed, keeping up with the current events, policies, and issues on the local, national, and federal level. Learn about voting rights, legislative processes, and how to influence decision-making. Also, serve on boards and commissions. The commission is always looking for people to serve on our board as well. Build network and connect with others. And let's not forget to take someone under our wing and mentor them. Thank you, Melvat.
Thank you, Rosemary. That was good. I hope people were taking notes, but this is going to be a recording posted on social media so people can go back and watch again. Thanks for those tips. I think it's important to note that, if people look around our screen and see the diversity that's represented here at the commission, that the Civil Rights Act, right, this is an on-the-nose thing, made it possible for many of us to be in the positions that we are today in employment and also our opportunities to engage in this democracy. So I'm so grateful for that also, and grateful for the work that all of you are doing. So we're going to go to Megan next. And Megan, there is one specific protection put forth in the 1964 Civil Rights Act that most notably drives the work that you do today, especially pertaining to Asian American Pacific Islander communities. Can you elaborate on what that protection is and its relevance to both your work and the communities you serve?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the question. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act has been interpreted to prohibit discrimination against people with limited English proficiency, or LEP, due to national origin. And as you mentioned when you read the titles out, the section protects your right for language assistance services by requiring certain federally funded programs to provide language access services through oral interpretation or document translation to those with LEP, to those who are LEP, with no charge, so free of charge. Recent Connecticut data reflects that 6 of the top 15 non-English most commonly languages spoken are AAPI languages, Asian American Pacific Islander languages. So I have referenced this specific title from the Civil Rights Act in conversations with state legislators and different officials and state agencies to highlight the necessity to make information and other materials for certain state programs that also receive federal financial assistance, like Medicaid, linguistically accessible to our LEP residents, in my work specifically our AAPI residents, to avoid excluded participation, denied benefits, and/or discrimination from these resources. Title VI was also referenced for language access protection by the U.S. Department of Education to require schools, districts, and state education agencies agencies to take affirmative steps to address language barriers to English learner students so that they can meaningfully engage and participate in their school's education programs. Also, for LEP parents to adequately be informed about school-related information. And we saw this precedent evident within our state education space in 2023 when the state legislature in Connecticut passed the Multilingual Learner Parent Bill of Rights in order to increase access to meaningful multi-generational engagement for parent and children at student conferences, offering translation services for that meaningful engagement. And so I just really appreciate the opportunity to learn from my colleagues. I think the Civil Rights Act, as you previously mentioned, really laid the groundwork for the functionality of our team to cross-pollinate. It's incredible to me. I can sit here and listen to TJ reference Title VI. I can listen to Yukio talking about the inclusion of national origin, and Michael talk about the inclusion of national origin, and it drives my work in a specific way, but it drives all of our work in a specific way. And I think that pays such credit to the kind of omnibus foundation that this laid for us to be able to access and unpack all of these different rights and opportunities and accessibility and equity through the Civil Rights Act. So as I reflect on the 60th anniversary and have the opportunity to reflect with you all, specifically the language justice protection really functions as a safeguard that helps drive my work in ensuring accessibility and opportunity, and also helps me work in a more meaningful and engaged way with my colleagues and the commission and you as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Megan. That was very interesting. And again, I'm excited about this conversation. It's also making me think about future conversations that we'll have. So I'm doing a plug for future roundtable discussions amongst commission staff. More to come in 2025, folks, stay tuned. Final question goes to, well, it's not the final question, but we're waiting to hear from Denise Drummond, who is our African-American policy analyst, has been with the legislature for many years as well. And we would love to hear, and I'm going to say as a Black woman, I would love to hear from you on, a little bit about the Civil Rights Act and what it did for Black Americans and the challenges that still remain. And where do we go from here? This is a constant refrain that we're having within the African-American and Black communities. So Denise, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Movet. And I'm excited that we are commemorating the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. And as you mentioned earlier, the Civil Rights Act, it was a pivotal moment in American history. It was designed to break the chains of segregation and systemic oppression that held Black Americans back for generations. And so what it did was it outlawed segregation in public spaces, it banned employment discrimination, and it dismantled barriers to voting and education. So it was it set the stage for a new era of opportunity. But as we look back 60 years later, we have to, ask ourselves how far we have really come, and how much further we still need to go. There's no question that Black Americans have made remarkable progress. In fact, the act opened the doors to education, leading to a surge in Black college graduates, a growing Black middle class, and it also paved the way for representation in every sector of society, from politics to business to the arts, technology. And our culture has influenced the world, and our resilience inspires hope. But and there's always a but, we can't ignore the challenges that still exist. Economic inequality is a stark reality. On average, Black families possess only a fraction of the wealth of white families, and the criminal justice system disproportionately impacts Black communities with mass incarceration, police violence. These serve as a harsh reminder of systemic racism. And you think about education. So when it comes to education, too many of our schools are still underfunded. Too many of our children are being denied the resources that they need to thrive. Even in healthcare, when we continue to see the disparities that affect communities, healthcare is still a concern. And what's even more concerning is the fact that some of these hard-won gains of the civil rights movement are being threatened today. For example, efforts to restrict voting rights, the rollback of affirmative action. These are stark reminders that progress is never guaranteed. So what do we do and where do we go from here? First, I would say, continue to honor the legacy of those who came before us by committing to the fight for justice. civic engagement, whether it's voting, advocating, or organizing in our communities, because these are critical. Second, I would say that we invest in our next generation. We need to equip young people with the tools, knowledge, and confidence to carry this fight forward. And finally, I would say to continue to dream big. We need to envision a future where equity is not just a goal, but it's a reality. A future where Black excellence is celebrated and expected, and everyone can live with dignity and freedom. 60 years ago, our nation was challenged to confront injustices, and it changed. Change did happen. But now it's our turn. It's on us to rise to the occasion, not just to honor what has been achieved, but to push for what's still possible. We have to remember that the fight for civil rights, it's not just a chapter in history. It's a living call to action for every one of us to build a world where we want to see, build the world we want to see today and for generations to come. So this is, what I have to add. And, I'm just so excited that we didn't let the year go by without commemorating the passage of the act. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Denise. Denise and I were determined. We were like, this is still going to happen. We're going to make it happen. Thank you so much for that, Denise. And, I'm very mindful. I know that we didn't spend time talking about it because that would be a whole nother hour. But there were so many civil rights activists and leaders across many generations who all, made the effort and did the work and fought the fight so that that Civil Rights Act could finally be passed. And they weren't just Black and African American people, there were people of all colors fighting for those freedoms and those basic human rights that everyone was entitled to. So thank you so much, Denise, for rounding out our roundtable with your final answers there. I have one more bonus question before we head out. And I know, Werner's been with the legislature 25 plus years as well, and has a rich history in working here in Connecticut for the people of Connecticut. And so this work of the commission that started out as 6 commissions and now has been consolidated down to 1, with our very long name and our very long acronym. But this is the work that we do in partnership with the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities and our sister commission, the Commission on Racial Equity and Public Health. All 3 commissions have very different calls and purposes to accomplish. But for us, as we think about our work moving forward, how can the principles of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, some of the things that we've discussed today, continue, and I'm going to say continue to guide the Commission's efforts to address systemic inequities, particularly ensuring equitable access to all the things that we discuss: education, healthcare, economic opportunities, employment, all of those things. How can the Act, as we commemorate these 60 years, continue to guide our work to address these things? And I'm going to go to Werner because I know Werner wanted to chime in on this question, but also open it up to others. Werner.
Thank you, Melved. And as I reflect on the passage of the act, I mean, I was born and raised in Santiago, Chile, so a lot of this history was news to me when I came and I started studying political science in higher education. But just the allegations and the realities of the abuses that occurred in the United States before the 1960s were incredible, horrible. Just to think that there were states in the South that, I can't imagine, but, if you were an African American woman, there were no bathrooms that were available and open for them. So I can't imagine what people would experience in the fact that they couldn't even go to certain parts in the country. And so that always centers me into the work that we do here at the Commission. Just to think that if you wanted to get water at a public place, there were separate locations for African Americans to drink water. Makes me really question many of the liberties that we have today, that we didn't experience that kind of discrimination at that level. Just the fact that you couldn't go to a hotel, or you couldn't be served with the same people at a breakfast counter. I mean, the amount and the problems that people faced, the conditions of housing in some parts of the South are horrible. To learn the history of the fact that in Connecticut, if you were African American, you couldn't actually purchase your own property in Connecticut. And we had people actually that were able um, uh, to to help African Americans to buy their own properties in different parts of the state. That I think it really brings me back to the work that we do at the commission. Like I said, the Connecticut General Assembly, with their wisdom, created the Connecticut Human Rights and Opportunities Commission to enforce this discriminatory practices here in the state. And then later on, it created all these legislative commissions within the legislative branch to help the legislature focus on looking at this discriminatory practices and try to make some work to make improvements. So as we look forward, our mandate for the CWCSEO, based on what the statute says, we are to speak and prioritize our work around health, safety, educational success, freedom from poverty, and freedom from discrimination, which I think speaks to the conversation that we're having here today, and the celebration that we're hosting in reference to the passage of this act is important. So I am very happy that I have the keys to the legislature, so that and all of us here, so that we can bring these issues to the forefront with this conversations that we normally host at the Capitol. So much work to be done in the future, but I'm excited that we took a pause to celebrate the 60-year anniversary.
Yeah, thank you, Werner. And so let's go around. Let's do like 30 to 60 seconds on maybe your final thoughts, or how are you allowing this Civil Rights Act of 1964, and also keeping it in the forefront of our minds, how are you allowing it to guide our work going forward? Who else would like to share?
Sure. So, when I was looking back on this Civil Rights Act, I noticed that it was the longest debate in Senate history. I think it lasted 60 working days,
Yeah.
including 7 Saturdays, and the filibuster was the longest in history. And it reminds us that progress does not come easy. There are tough decisions that need to be made in the legislative process, and we always need to remain focused and sincere with the work. It's a good reminder that looking at disparities in all of the work, Melvet, at the beginning, you've mentioned how we're a data-driven agency. For education policy specifically, when we look at, funding for education, that's critically important to consider, especially with our approach in the state for student-centered funding for education. But even something as linear, but equally as important, such as suspensions and expulsions. When we look at the disparities that are happening there, this work relates, and it all cycles back to, historic acts like the Civil Rights Act. So it's a good reminder, and it keeps us on track.
Thank you, TJ. Someone else?
Okay, I'd just like to add that, I'm happy that, that we have a position, that we have this platform where we can raise awareness and educate communities about issues that are happening, in our state, and the opportunity to engage the legislature in the work that we do and connect our communities to the legislature. So I'm excited and happy that we have that platform to do the work.
Yes, absolutely, Denise. Who's next?
Yeah. I really the dream big that you said, Denise, really resonated with me. And I think the Civil Rights Act, right? They were really dreaming big. And even though it really was centered and focused around the African American and Black community, they were dreaming big and wanted the best, right? What for everyone, right? What's best for one community will be really greatly like a positive influence for other communities as well. And as the commission, where we have so many different intersectional identities, intersectional work that we need to do, we can dream big because of things like the Civil Rights Act. And continue that like cross-racial solidarity and trying to figure out, well, how is this one policy around housing going to impact not only right the Asian community, the Black community, the Latino community, but how is it really just going to benefit everyone in general? So, you know, I would love to continue to dream big like this act did and changing so many different areas of policy and law and continue to work together with our communities. So thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Yuki. I'm going to go to Michael. Michael, what say you as we get ready to close out?
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to participate in this work. And as we look to the future, we can think about the constituents we serve. We can understand that families are the building block of our society here, and we want to continue to support them. We want to continue to support our older adults so that they can age well in place. I've had the good privilege to work with Megan and Denise in particular on this topic of family caregiving, particularly for spouses. This is where we want Connecticut to move going forward, for grandparents caring for grandchildren, so we can help give them the support that they need. This helps to support cultural cognizance and make sure that folks can get community-based services where appropriate. And this really also ties into other aspects, including Supreme Court decision from '99, the Olmstead decision, that established unjustified institutionalization of people with disabilities as discrimination. So the federal government has been recognizing that over the last few years and allowing for spouses to also be included in programs like Connecticut's Adult Family Living Program. And so our work going forward will be to help encourage the state to take advantage of these flexibilities so that we can have more families stay together in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Who's next? Christian?
Yeah, I can go. I think honestly, I don't think I can phrase it better than dream big, but I think specifically, sorry to steal your phrase, Yukio, but specifically dreaming big about what comes next. So I think one of the through lines through a lot of what everyone has shared is how far we've come and also how far we have to go. The state and the country are undeniably a better place than they were 60 years ago because of the Civil Rights Act. But while change doesn't come easy, it also doesn't come all at once. And there's still ways that we can change to be an even better place for every single person who lives in this state and in this country. And I think, I believe it was Denise who said it, it's our turn to sort of pick up that legacy and push forward the ideas of equity and opportunity until we hit that point where truly every single person who lives in Connecticut and lives in this country has the chance to live the life that they want to live.
Oh, here, Christian. I love this. And I see big smiles from Megan. Megan, you have some remarks before we close?
Yeah, just reflecting off of everyone, but just feeling inspired and dreaming, but also that notion of like enforcement and kind of taking check of where we are at this landmark and where we have to go. When this act passed in the early 1960s, Asian Americans only made up 0.5% of the national population. And we've grown in the time since then to around 7%. And a lot of that was the cross-solidarity of the Black Civil Rights Movement that happened through this act. And it laid the groundwork for the things that Yukio talked about for the influx of immigration and naturalization for AAPIs. And so just being able to enforce the vision that was set forth, as Denise said, by those that came before us, protecting the dreams of those that came before us, and using the blood, sweat, and tears that they put forward to gain this progress to make sure that we use the ability and the privilege that we have with the keys to the Capitol to advocate on behalf of our constituents, as that is a form of our and my utmost civic engagement that I see as I kind of hold it. So I'm just really inspired, feeling really empowered. I also appreciate this is coming up right before we kind of go into our legislative session, and I'm very excited to take this energy and turn forward and work with you all in the coming months.
Thank you, Megan. And so if there are no other comments from the team, I would end our time by saying that, this has been a rich discussion. There are more discussions like this to come as we look at other, important legislation that has affected not only the state of Connecticut, but our entire country. I think we're in a position, and some of you have said it, that we have a privilege here at the commission in the platform that we have in order to engage communities, engage policymakers, engage legislators, and convene people to have discussions around important issues that might not be as important to other people. I would also say that as we've heard historically, if one of us is not free, we're all not free. And so until we can ensure that there is positive change and positive outcomes for all of our residents, then we still have much work to do. As I like to say, thriving families drive economies, but more importantly, we're looking for a healthy Connecticut. And so that includes people being healthy emotionally, physically, financially, and really feeling like they belong in this state. So thank you so much for this rich conversation and discussion. Thank you to all of our viewers. Please feel free to reach out to us at the Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. We are here to serve you and here to serve our legislature. We'll see you soon.